Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Peh Zayin. In the Mishnah that we studied yesterday, it said that limbs that are supposed to be burnt on top of the Mizbeach, so ideally those limbs should be burnt down to ashes. Before that, while they're still whole, they have to be burnt, and if one gets benefit from them, then they commit me'ilah. Now we asked, at what point are they considered sufficiently burnt such that if they fell off, do you have to put them back on or not? The Mishnah said midnight is the cutoff point in terms of time. That if it fell off, you put these limbs on top of the Mizbeach, and they burned for a certain amount of time, and then they fell off before midnight, you have to put them back on. And if you don't put them back on and you get benefit from them, you commit me'ilah. These are limbs from a sacrificial animal. The blood has been sprinkled, so these are holy things that have to be burnt. You can't get benefit from them. However, if it's after midnight, midnight is a cutoff, and now it's considered sufficiently burnt. It's already gone, and therefore, if it falls off after midnight, you do not have to put it back on, and you do not commit me'ilah if you get benefit from it. The Gemara explained that this is only talking about a case where you have a hardened limb. If it's burnt to ashes before midnight, well, there's nothing to talk about. Literally, there's nothing there to talk about because it's all ashes. So then, for sure, there's nothing to do. You don't have to put it back on. There's no me'ilah if you use those ashes for something. And if it still has fresh meat on it that's not fully cooked, not burnt up, then even after chatzot, you would commit me'ilah and you have to put it back on. So the reality is that if there's actually meat on it, then certainly you have to put it back on. But if it's blackened, a blackened limb, it's all dried out from the fire, then midnight serves as a cutoff time, and before that, it's considered me'ilah. After that, there's no me'ilah. Now we have a more complicated case. Itmar. פרשו קודם חסות וחזירן אחר חסות. רבא אמר חסות שני או קלטן, רב חיסדא אמר עמוד השחר או קלטן. If something, let's assume now that it's a blackened limb, it doesn't have any meat on it, but it's not turned to ashes yet. Now, it fell off before chatzot. Ideally, you'd put it back on right away. And then, if you put it back on right away, before chatzot, and then when chatzot comes, that would be the cutoff time. It would be considered consumed. And then, if it fell off again, you wouldn't have to put it back on, and you would not commit me'ilah if you used it. But here's the thing. It fell off before chatzot, so it's not finished yet. It's still me'ilah. But you didn't put it on right away. You put it on after chatzot. What about that case? What if it would fall off again? Would you have to put it back on? What if you used it after that time? Would you commit me'ilah? At what point would you stop committing me'ilah? When's the next cutoff time? Rabbah says it's the next chatzot, midnight of the next night. Since midnight is the cutoff time, and now you put this limb on after midnight of the first night, so you missed that cutoff time, so you got to put it back on. If it turns into ashes, okay, great. But if not, and it's still a whole limb, then so you put it back on. When will it be considered now consumed? 24 hours later at midnight the next night. If it would fall off again before that, put it back on. If it would fall off after that, then you don't have to put it back on, and then there's no me'ilah. Rav Chisda, however, says Amud HaShachar or Kaltan, that morning when it gets to Amud HaShachar, at dawn, then that is the next cutoff time. If you missed midnight, then you still have dawn, and that way, if, let's say, again, it fell off before midnight, you put it on after midnight. Let's say it falls off again, put it back on again, and you still commit me'ilah if you don't, and if you use it. Until when? Until dawn. Once dawn comes, then, even if it's not turned to ashes, it's still a dried out limb, then that's it. You don't have to put it back on after that. You would not commit me'ilah after dawn. Amri be'rav. My tamad Rav Chisda. What's Rav Chisda's source? Rabbah we understand, because Rabbah says midnight. You missed this midnight, okay, wait till the next midnight. But what's the source to add another cutoff time, that of dawn? Uma hasot she'en ose lina ose ikul. Amud hashachar she'ose lina enodin she'ose ikul. He learns it from a kal vachomer. If hatzot, midnight, which does not make something lina. Lina means that it's considered left overnight, and then it's considered invalid. Meat of a korban is invalid after the morning comes. Now, midnight does not make something violate lina. You could still, eat it and so on, if it's a sacrificial part that you can eat. And yet, oseh ikul, it does, chatzot is a cutoff time for considering it consumed. Then all the more so, amud hashachar, which now will make something, if you leave over sacrificial meat after dawn, then you would violate lina. That becomes overnight. So that's a significant marker of time. It makes a fundamental change in the legal status of the korban. All the more so, it should be a cutoff time for consumption. And so that's where he learns it from a kal vachomer. Okay, now another variation of a case. Pirshu kodem hasot ve'chaziran lahar amud hashachar. What if you had some sacrificial meat? It was from the daytime. You did a shechita on an animal. Okay, you put the limbs up on the mizbeach sometime during the day or in the beginning of the night. And then, before they turned to ashes, they fell off before chatzot. Now, you didn't put it back on right away. You didn't put it back on not even after chatzot. You put it back on only after dawn. Well, now you missed the midnight cutoff time. You missed the dawn cutoff time. Now, what's the next cutoff time that you can say after that you will not commit me'ilah anymore? Rabbah amar hasot sheni ol katan. Rabbah says, well, you still have midnight of the next night. That's what he said anyway in that case, because Rabbah didn't think that dawn is a cutoff time, so he remains the same. Rav Chisda amar en behen ikul le'olam. Rav Chisda, however, who said that the cutoff time was dawn, but you missed it. You put it on after dawn. Now they are never going to be considered that they're consumed. I mean, unless you turn them to ashes. Okay, then for sure, then they're just ashes. But we're talking about if it remains a whole limb, then even after midnight of the next night and the dawn of the next night, that's it. You can't have, there's no more cutoff times after that. It will remain prohibited, and you have to keep putting it back on the mizbeach, and you would commit me'ilah forever after, because you missed both cutoff times, the first midnight and the first dawn. Matkifla Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is going to object to both of those opinions. And he says, Uman le'malan dechasot berosh hamizbeach b'shavya lehu ikul. Who said that chatzot, when we say chatzot, effectuates consumption, who says that it has to be on the mizbeach at that time? It could be even if it's not on the mizbeach. Dilma kol hecha demashkecha lehu b'shavya lehu ikul. Maybe wherever it is, that is still going to be a good cutoff time. In other words, we have this limb. We put it on the mizbeach beforehand, early during the day, or early in the night. And it got blackened up, so there's no more fresh meat on it. And then it fell off. Okay, now it falls off. If I use it, I'm going to be liable to me'ilah. Until when? Until midnight. Once midnight comes, that's it. That's a cutoff time, even if it's on the floor. Even if it's not on the fire, chatzot, that's the time. It already is somewhat burnt. It's not ashes. It's not raw. It's in the middle, and so that's it. Doesn't have to be on the fire, and therefore that solves both problems, both cases that we mentioned before. Doesn't matter if you put it back on after the fire, back on the fire after chatzot or after Amud HaShachar, or if you never put it back on the fire. It was on the fire. It was somewhat consumed. There's no more meat that's not dried out, and therefore that's it. Midnight makes it considered consumed. Shalchu mitam hilcheta ke Rav Yosef. There was a message from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel that says, halacha is like Rav Yosef, that midnight works even if it's not on the fire. And another two proofs. Itmar nameh amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba pershu kodem hasod vechezira nachar chatzot lo nehenin velo mo'alin. Says that Rabbi Chia bar Abba said that if limbs fell off before hasot and you then put them back on after chatzot, you can't get benefit from it, but you don't commit me'ilah. So you can't get benefit from it. So midrabanan shouldn't get benefit from it. That's why it's actually a good idea to put it back on the mizbeach. But Mideoraita, you do not commit me'ilah anymore. Once Hasot comes and goes, even if it was not on the fire during Chatzot, it doesn't matter. There's no more me'ilah. V'chen tana bar kapara. Pershu kodem Chatzot v'chzran achar Chatzot yosin mideh me'ilah. Same thing. But now it's a baraita taught by bar kapara. If the limb fell off before Chatzot and you put it on after Chatzot, once Chatzot comes, there is no more me'ilah. And so you see that Chatzot works whether it's still on the fire or not on the fire. Amar le Rapapa labaye v'chi machad eshchalu mitam hilchata kedav Yosef ve'amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba v'chen taneh bar kapara Rabba v'Rav Chisda b'mai pelige. Rapapa asked Abaye, since we got a message from Eretz Yisrael, the halacha is like Rav Yosef, and Rabbi Chia bar Abba said the same halacha, and there's a braita from bar kapara that said this halacha that the Chatzot is a cutoff time even if it's not on the fire. Then we go back. Rabba and Rav Chisda, they said, no, if it's not on the fire, then at that time of Chatzot, then you need another cutoff time. You have to wait till dawn or midnight of the next night. What are they talking about? We have so many proofs that midnight works to consider it consumed and no more me'ilah, even if it's not on the fire at that time. So how could they say that there are halachot against so many other sources? Amar le bishmenim. And he answered, when Rabba and Rav Chisda said that you still commit me'ilah and you have to put it back on the fire, they were talking about limbs that were fatty, and so they weren't totally burnt yet. That's why they said, if it still has fat on it, then Chatzot is not going to work to be a cutoff time. That's why they said you have to put it back onto the fire and you still commit me'ilah. Be'amine Rava merabba. Lina mo'elet berosho shel mizbeach, or ena mo'elet berosho shel mizbeach. Rava, the fourth generation Amora, asked his teacher Rabba whether if you have limbs that are on top of the mizbeach, they're not on the fire, they're not burning, they're just on top. So when, let's say they're up there all night, past the morning, does lina kick in? Once it's lina, then it's prohibited to use them, to burn them. You can't burn them at all after that. They're prohibited as lina. Or do we say they're not on the floor? If they were off the mizbech, that's when you have lina. And once you violate lina, then you cannot burn those things anymore. Or if it's blood, you can't sprinkle the blood anymore. Once the morning comes, then it's lina. But if it's on top of the mizbeach, maybe it's protected from lina because it's up there. If it was burning up there, you could continue burning it. It could stay in the fire. So maybe even if it's not on the fire, but it's on the mizbeach, so maybe that is protected from the prohibition of lina, and you could still use it afterwards. Hechidame. We ask, well, what's the case? Ilema delo yardu hashta lanu ba'azara amarta delo yardu berosho shemizbeach mi ba'aya. Is it talking about where they are up there and they stayed up there? Well, then, of course, you can go ahead and leave them up there and burn them, because even if hashta lanu ba'azara, even if it stayed on the floor in the courtyard, and then by mistake they were placed up on the mizbeach, you would say, right, im alu lo yerdu. You shouldn't put them up in the first place, but if they're up already, then you leave them there and you don't bring them down, and you can burn them up there. So then, if they were up there already, then all the more so. So in other words, what's the difference of your question, whether there is lina or not lina? Even if there is lina up on top, but it's already on top, so of course you're going to leave it up there, and then you can burn it. So what practical difference would it make? Ve'ela de yardu. Oh no, we're talking about a case where it was up there all night through the morning, but then it came down. Now we learned a rule that once you have lina, once something is pasul, if it comes down, we don't put it back up. So now here's something where, well, that would depend. If you say there is lina, even if it's on top of the mizbeach, it's not on the fire, and then if it comes back down, we're not going to put it back up. However, if you say up on top, it's protected from lina, there's no lina up there, then even if it comes down afterwards, it's perfectly fine. It's no lina on this meat, you can put it back up. לשולחן מדמינן לה דתנן אפילו הן על השולחן ימים רבים אין בכך כלום עוד ימה לקרקע מדמינן. So here's the two sides of the question, assuming in fact it did come down after the whole night. Do we compare being on top of the Mizbeach to being on the Shulchan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Masechet Menachot, that the loaves, the showbread, the 12 loaves that are there all week from Shabbat to Shabbat, even if they're there many days, even if it goes past Shabbat, it's okay. We don't consider them invalid because it's on the Shulchan. So the Shulchan protects things from violating Lina. There's no Lina as long as they are on the Shulchan, and the Kohanim can eat those loaves, no problem. They don't become invalid. So is being on top of the altar like being on the Shulchan, or is being on top of the altar like being on the floor of the temple courtyard? Because they're not on the fire, so they're just they're elevated, they're on top of some stones, but maybe it's the same status of being on the floor because they're not on the fire, and therefore there is lina, and if it comes down, then you could not put it back up. That's the question. Amale and lina berosho mizbeach. Rabba says, no, there's no lina on top of the mizbeach. It's protected. It's good. It's still valid. Even if it comes down, you could put it back up. Kibela mine ola. Did Rava, the student, accept this answer, or did he reject it? Tashema ditmar. Barim shelanu ba'azara mekater veholech kol halayla. Lan berosho mizbeach mekater veholech leolam. Well, we have a tradition that teaches if you have limbs that are overnight in the azara, well then, if it's still nighttime, then you can bring them up. It didn't violate lina yet before the morning came, so you can do it all night, but afterwards, then you can't put them up there anymore. On the other hand, if it's spent overnight on top of the Mizbeach, then that's it. They're on top of the Mizbeach anyway, so you can burn them forever. Now, everybody will agree with this because they're already up there, and that's the law. Once they're up there, you don't bring them down. As long as they're up on the Mizbeach, then they stay there and you burn them up there. Now, so there's no machloket about that. But here, this tradition continues. Yardu, Rabba Amar Ya'alu, Rava Amar Lo Ya'alu. If they were there all night, but then they came down afterwards, after the morning, Rabba says, you can put them back up. So clearly, Rabba says, as he answered up here, that the being on top of the Mizbech protects them from the prohibition of Lina. However, Rava disagrees and he says, no. If they're up there already, fine, let them burn. You can burn them. But if they came down, then you cannot bring them back up. Shema mina, lo kibela mine, shema mina. So we can derive from here that Rava did not accept the answer of his teacher, and he thought that there is Lina, even when it's on top of the Mizbeach. Keshem she'amizbeach mekadesh v'chule. The Mishnah taught that just like the top of the Mizbeach makes invalid korbanot sanctified such that you leave them up there, so too the ramp and also service vessels, sanctified vessels, if something goes in them, also they become sanctified even if that thing is invalid. Tenor Rabbanan, hanogea b'mizbeach en li ela mizbeach, kebesh minayin, tamod omar et hamizbeach, kelesh haret minayin, Talmud omar kol hanogea bahem yikdash. So what's the source for each of these three things that they make something invalid sanctified? So one is from the pasuk in Shemot that says hanogea b'mizbeach, whatever touches the altar will become sacred. So there you go. That's true for the mizbeach itself. How about the ramp? Well, another pasuk says et hamizbeach. There's a bunch of pasukim that have et hamizbeach, so it's not clear which one it is. So whichever one, et hamizbeach. The word et comes to add. And how about service vessels? It says regarding service vessels, anything that whatever touches them, yikdash becomes holy. So that means that's it. It becomes holy even for being in a service vessel. Be'amin Resh Lakish min Rabbi Yochanan. Kelesharet mahu sheyekadeshu et hapesulin. Resh Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, can a service vessel make something invalid sacred? Amar le tenitua keshem shamizbeach ve'kevesh mekadeshin et hara'ui lehen kach kelim mekadeshin. He says it's in the Mishnah. We just learned it. Just like a mizbeach and the ramp make something sanctified, so that which is fitting to it, in other words, something that would be burnt, but it's invalid for some reason. so too the temple vessels also make it kadosh. No, what I'm asking is, can you put it on the mizbeach lechatechila? You see, if something is already on the mizbeach and it was invalid and it got up there for some reason by mistake, okay, now it's already up there, so that makes sense that you'd leave it up there and you'd even put it on the fire and burn it. But now it's in the, if it's just in the service vessel, now, lechatechila, do you bring it up there? Now, if what else could it mean in our Mishnah that says it becomes kadosh? There is another halacha that this could apply to, which is redemption. If you have flour that you sanctified, you designated to be for korban mincha, but it becomes tameh, because something is wrong with it. So before you put it in a service vessel, you still have it in a regular vessel from home. You can always redeem it for money, take the money and buy a new flour that's tahor, and then the other flour that's tameh is desanctified. You can do that until you put it in a service vessel. However, once you bring that flour and the kohen puts it in the service vessel, now you cannot redeem it anymore. It becomes sanctified. So that's one law that this would apply to, that it becomes sanctified. So that, fine, we know that. But the question now is, lechatechila. If it was something invalid limb, invalid flour, and now it was in the service vessel, now lechatechila, we can bring it up to the mizbeach and burn it. Haname tenena. And Rabbi Yochanan says this is a Mishnah also that we learned earlier. Shekibelu pesulin vezariku et damo. My love, shekibelu pesulin vezariku pesulin, says in the Mishnah, anything that was received by a pasul kohen, like the kohen is tameh, and he received the blood and he sprinkled the blood. So isn't this talking about a case where a tameh person did both? A tameh kohen, pasul kohen, received it and also sprinkled it. Then the law is, do not bring it up lechatechila. Only b'diavad. If it's already up there, then leave it up there. But we can infer from this that what if it's only one or the other? What if it was received in a temple vessel by a pasul kohen, and then a good kohen did the sprinkling? In that case, that would be better, and you would put it up there lechatechila. So here we have something invalid because the kohen who received the item was tameh, so it is in fact invalid. But as long as everything else is okay, you put it up there lechatechila. So isn't that a good answer? The Rabbi Yochanan says we already have it in the Mishnah. But Shakish says, no, that's not the only way to read that Mishnah. Shekibelu pesulin, inameh shezarku pesulin. That Mishnah might be giving two cases, not one case. Either that the tameh kohen received it, or that a tameh pasul kohen sprinkled the blood. Either way, you cannot bring it up there lechatechila. So you can read that Mishnah as saying either or. So it's two different cases, which means that even if the only problem was that a pasul kohen received it, so yes, it's received in a temple vessel, but you should not bring it up there lechatechila. And so therefore the Mishnah can be read not that, as you said, and therefore there is no proof for my answer from the Mishnah that you quoted. Next question: Avir mizbeach kemizbeach tameh or la? Is the airspace above the mizbeach considered like the mizbeach? In other words, if something remained in the airspace of a mizbeach all night, would we say, oh, that's protected from lina? If something went up into the airspace, would we say, oh, okay, it's up there and now you can't bring it down? Or when we talk about being on the mizbeach, it has to be physically on the mizbeach, and if it's lifted up into the airspace, then that's the same as leaving the mizbeach and falling on the floor. Tashema keshem shemizbeach mekadesh kach kebesh mekadesh. Well, let's learn it from the Mishnah that said, just like the Mizbeach makes an invalid thing sanctified, so too the ramp makes it sanctified. Vi amart avir Mizbeach lav ke Mizbeach dameh, avir kebesh nami lav ke kebesh dameh, hechi masik le mi kebesh la Mizbeach, hava le yarud. If you say that the airspace of the altar is not valid, and is not like the altar itself, then surely you would also say that the airspace above the ramp is not like the ramp, and so that may explains if something is on the ramp, okay, it's on the ramp, now it's on there, and you leave it on there, and you can take it to the fire to be burnt. But how are you going to get it from the ramp to the Mizbeach where the fire is to be burnt? You're going to pick it up, right? Okay, so now there's something, it was invalid. Someone put some invalid limb. It was brought onto the ramp. You shouldn't have put it on the ramp, but now you put it on the ramp. Once it's on the ramp, it's Mekadesh, the limb, and now you can burn it. Okay, so fine, a Kohen goes and picks it up. The second he picks it up, now it's already in the airspace, and if you say airspace is not considered like on the ramp, then that means it already descended. Once an invalid thing descends, then you don't put it on. So there's never a case where you would bring it from the ramp to the fire. You can't do it. And the answer is actually there is a way. Dinagadle. If you drag it, you don't pick it up from the ramp, you drag it all along the floor, so it always stays on the ramp. So still, we can say airspace is not like being on the floor. Hold on, you have a problem because we learned above that there is a airspace there's a gap between the ramp and the altar. It's a small gap, but you're going to have to go over that gap, and then it's not going to be resting on the floor. No, that's okay. Rubola kebesh kakebesh. It's a small gap, and therefore the limb, when most of the limb is on the ramp, then even if a minority is in the gap, it's still considered resting on the ramp. And then once majority passes the gap, and most of it is on the mizbech, then it's considered like it's on the mizbech. Well, you can follow the majority of the limb, and it's okay if not all of it is on the ramp or on the mizbeach. Okay, since we established that, we can use this tifshot meha ha deba'ed ami barchama. If that's true, then we can use this to resolve a question that Rami Bar Chama had. Rami Bar Chama is always the one to ask questions like if something's half in, half out, very technical questions. And he said that wise guy questions like the chicken that's half in, one leg out. Yesh chibur le'olin or la. Is there a connection between limbs or not? In other words, if you have a limb that's on the ramp or on the mizbech, and it's connected to another piece of the limb that is off of it. So now that connected piece, it's an extended thing, do we consider it also the part that might be on the floor, but it's connected by some piece of flesh to the part that's on top? So do we consider the part that's below, that's off of it, like it's on the mizbeach or not? And he asked that question, and we didn't have an answer. So if you accept what you just said, then tifshot yesh chibur. We can derive that there is a chibur. As long as a majority of the thing is on, then yes, even the other part that's hanging off still is considered on. And so we can answer his question in the positive. Tifshot. Okay, that's not going to be a challenge to us. Fine, so we'll answer Rami Bar Chama's question. Just because he was in doubt doesn't mean that we have to deny this possibility. He was in doubt. Maybe he didn't think of this connection. And therefore, yes, in fact, we could answer that. Okay, so now we're left with the dilemma, because it could be that the airspace is not considered being on the floor, and still you could drag it up there, and the gap between the ramp and the mizbeach is not a problem. And so we go back to the question, and we say, Matkif la Rava bar Rav Chana, v'i amart avir mizbeach kemizbeach dameh, ola ta'of tepasla b'machshava hechi mashkachat la, ha kalta mizbeach. If you say that the airspace of the altar is like the altar itself, and the airspace goes all the way up, and so anything in the airspace will be like it's on the floor of the mizbeach, then a korban ola of a bird, that there has to be some case where if you have wrong intention, as you're doing milika on the bird, you have intention that you're going to offer it outside the time. It's going to be pigul. Well, how could you ever have a case like that? After all, where do you do milika of an olah bird? You do it on top of the mizbeach. The kohen stands on top of the mizbeach and does milika. Now, al kalta mizbeach, the altar will already accept it. In other words, you can only violate pigul, intention to burn it outside of the time, if when you actually burn it outside the time, it would be a violation. But in this case, even if he stood there all day, all night, until the next day, holding this bird, and then offered it the next day, it would be okay because it's already on top. and it's in the airspace, so he's holding it up in the airspace. But if you say the airspace is like being on the Mizbeach, then it's acceptable. And if it's acceptable, if he actually waits till tomorrow to offer it, then it will also be acceptable if he thinks about doing that. You can't violate thinking about doing something. If you actually do it, it would be okay. So where would you have a case where someone could violate pigul regarding a bird olah? מתקיף לרב שמעי בר אשיה, למה לה? משכח עדה כגון דאמר, הריני מולכה על מנת להורידה למחר ולהעלותה ולהקטירה. Rav Shimi rejects that question. He says, why not? You can have a case where the Kohen says, I'm doing melika on this olah bird on condition that I'm going to bring it down off of the Mizbeach tomorrow, and then I'm going to bring it back up and burn it. So he says he's going to bring it down, and then he's going to bring it back up. So that's where, if he does that, if he would actually hold on, do melikap on top during the day, wait there all night, and then the next day bring it down, he would not be able to bring it back up. And so that would be a violation, that would be invalid, and therefore if he thinks about doing that, it will be a pigul. So we have a case. Okay, that's okay for Rava. Rava, remember, said that if something is left overnight on top of the Mizbeach, it is considered lina. If it's already up there and stays up there, fine. But if it comes down, then you cannot bring it back up. Then this makes sense. But according to Rabbah, he said that if it's up there overnight on the Mizbeach, then it's protected from lina. And according to Rabbah, as long as the Kohen was up there all night. And if you say airspace is like the being on the Mizbeach, and he's holding it all night, and it goes there past the morning, then it's protected from lina. Even if he would take it down, he could bring it back up, and there would be no problem of lina, and therefore there would be also no problem of pigul. So how could we ever have a case of pigul according to Rabbah under this assumption? We could have a case also according to Rabbah where the Kohen, before he does milika, he says, I'm going to do milika on this olah bird on condition that I'm going to bring it down before Amud HaShachar, and then I'm going to bring it back up after Amud HaShachar. Since it's down on the floor of the courtyard when the morning comes, surely it violates lina. And then if you bring it back up afterwards, then you'll be in violation of burning something that was left overnight. Since you would be in violation, thinking about it also will make it pigul. So we do have a case where we can figure out how to do, how one could violate pigul, and therefore this line of attack is rejected. Okay, let's try again, and let's try to resolve it to one side, that in fact the airspace is considered like being on the Mizbeach. From the following argument, because if you would say that the airspace is not like being on the Mizbeach, how could you ever have a case of a bird that's a korban hatat, where you're supposed to sprinkle the blood? Let's say it's pasul. Okay, if it's pasul, lechatechila, you should not sprinkle the blood. But let's say it was placed upon the mizbeach. It was already placed there. Okay, so once it's on there, we don't bring it down. We would go ahead and we would sprinkle the blood. How could you ever have a case where you could sprinkle the blood without lifting it up into the airspace? You have to pick up the bird and you have to go and to the side on the ledge and sprinkle it on the altar. So then it's already going to be on the ledge there. So haba le yarud, if you say the airspace is not like being on the mizbeach itself. So now you took it off. Once you take it off, then you cannot sprinkle the blood anymore. Furthermore, shar pisulin hechizarik lehu midama. Other items that are disqualified, how would you be able to sprinkle their blood? Because you're going to have to take the blood and you're going to have to pick it up into an airspace. And so once the Kohen picks it up, it's already in the airspace. It's considered taken off the Mizbeach. So there'll be no case where you would have something that, it was invalid. It was brought up there onto the Mizbeach for some reason. Now that it's there, we don't take it down. You can continue the service and sprinkle the blood. But how could you ever sprinkle the blood? Because to sprinkle the blood, you're going to have to pick it up. And then once you pick it up, it's in the airspace, and now it's considered that it came down, and then you wouldn't be able to continue. So the answer is de magat lehu. You could take the bird and press it against the wall. Don't let go, right? Just drag it along and press it against the wall and put the blood and squeeze the blood out that way. Ha hazahi misuihi hazirika shefichahi. No, do you call that sprinkling? For korban hatat, it has to be sprinkled. A korban off of a bird, there you do the squeezing. That's true. But if it's a korban hatat, that's what we're asking about korban chatat, then that would be squeezing, not sprinkling. Do you call that throwing the blood? That's pouring the blood in a case of other offerings. And so this would not fulfill sprinkling. The manuscript doesn't have ve'od. This is not an added reason. It's part of the same reasoning. Is this the way of sprinkling? Is this the way of two words for sprinkling? Haza'ah, zirika, one for korban hatat of a bird, one for other bloods? It's not. This is a way of squeezing or pouring, and so you would not be able to fulfill it. Amar Rav Asher, id nakatlehu berosh hamizbech hachiname, ki kamar de talanhu bekanya mai teko. Rav Asher says this whole question that we've been asking about the airspace is completely different than my interpretation. If you are holding it on top of the mizbeach, then that's of course on the mizbeach. If the kohen himself is standing on the mizbeach or on the ledge of the mizbeach and he's holding the blood or the bird, then that's considered on the mizbeach, of course, because he's standing on it. So he's just an extension of the mizbeach. That's not what we were talking about when we asked it in the first place. It's not where the kohen is holding it on top of there. Holding on top of there, that's not considered airspace. It's still on the mizbeach. Rather, we're talking about a case where a kohen is standing on the floor and he's holding a pole, and the limb or the bird is hanging from the pole over on the airspace of the mizbeach. And so let's say it's there, and it's there all night, or it was up there already, and now is that considered on the mizbeach? It's hanging in the airspace, not that someone's carrying it on the mizbeach, but rather it's hanging from a pole of someone who's standing on the ground. That's totally airspace. That's what the question was all about, and we leave that question unanswered. Teko. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.